I am Misbah Azam.
And I am Sabahat Ashraf, also writing under the pen name iFaqeer.
And this is Viewpoint from Overseas. Sabahat.
Yes, sir.
So we are here. We have a government opened maybe for 15 days, but Mr. Trump is still threatening. And how do you see that, first of all?
Well, first of all, the thing that really does need to be said is that Mr. Trump had 3 losses pretty much, and Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats had 3 wins in a row. One was with the State of the Union, then there was reopening the government, and now he has again followed up with the State of the Union. The interesting thing there that I was writing in, sort of on social media as well, is that one needs to recognize that the Constitution was followed. Even as unconventional a president as Donald J. Trump, in the end, had to defer to the appropriate branch of government when it came to actually their turf. I mean, the State of the Union, if he wants to give the speech on the Congress's turf, he has to defer to them. They are in their own turf, especially literally in the building of Congress. They are sovereign. He cannot, he tried to browbeat them. It did not work. He had to back off. He had to understand. And that is a win for constitutionality. However, we also do need to give him credit for that. And the fact, and I've held this always, is that this is the strength of the American system, the health and maturity and health is the right word, healthiness of the system, that even, and as I was saying, an unconventional president, to put it politely, as Donald J. Trump, did not push past the ultimate constitutional bumpers, so to speak, that are in place.
Yeah, see, the thing is that for some time, I'm looking into a little bit of American Civil War. And I think it is a good idea over the time we talk about civil wars, we talk about the Vietnam War, the Korean War, and had a full discussion on that. So I was looking into some Civil War history, that how it happened, the Missouri Compromise, and after that, Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1857 and all those things. And I was observing how things were moving, this sectional rift in the American society, how it slowly drifted and culminated to the war, Civil War of 1861, actually. We started in 1861.
61 to 65,
yeah, 61 to 65. So, Sabahat, let us talk about that a little bit. Okay, I will tell you how I see it. However, I would like to have your views, because see what happened, 7 states came out, first seceded.
I believe
illegally.
there were at that point 34 states.
No, actually initially 7, then 4 more.
No, what I'm saying is a total number of
states. Total number of states.
Was 34.
Yes, 34, because Missouri was 24th state and Maine was probably 25th, if I remember correctly. So South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee decided to secede, and Constitution did not say anything at that time. that they can do it or they cannot do it.
Right.
So of course that was another debate that time, that if they decided to secede, did the federal government or constitution had a right to tell them not to do it? So just give me your view, how you see this war.
Well, so at first, I guess we were talking about how it happened and what. That's the interesting thing. I mean, to this day, people that want to defend the Confederacy, or people, frankly, Southerners, or people that make a thing about the Confederacy or consider it part of their heritage, always make the argument that this was a states' rights issue, that their issue really wasn't slavery. It was the fact that the southern states had a certain policy and the federal government had no right to tell them to change it. And at one level, slavery itself is one of those, fundamental issues. And we have seen some very fundamental issues come up just in the last few years. I mean, abortion, which is not very recent, but has been around 45 years or so, the change. Then even gay rights. I mean, there are certain very fundamental things. And so the way it happened was also a matter of, and again, because we are kind of discussing this in that constitutional framework, the interesting thing I find, and I didn't know this because I've always been interested in history, American history, even before I moved to this country. What I didn't realize is that list you read out of states, Virginia, when you say it was not all of Virginia, part of Virginia. And there were a few states that were actually slave states that never declared secession. Some actually declared later, like you said. Others never did. At least two of them, most importantly, Delaware.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is, we talk about the Mason-Dixon line. A lot of people don't realize, or it's counterintuitive to think that the Mason-Dixon line is actually the border between New Jersey and Delaware. It's that far north. And so through the war, as there was a fight on slavery, so to speak, Lincoln passed, or actually issued, the Emancipation Proclamation. That is what we associate with the end of slavery or ending slavery in the South. The funny thing is, that was a proclamation. It was not a law. He did it under his powers as commander-in-chief. He was prosecuting war. He issued a wartime order that applied to the people he was waging war against. Funny thing is, these 2 or 3 states that were not, that hadn't seceded but were slave states, it did not apply to them. However, of the 4 or so states that were slave states but stayed with the Union, 3 or 4, I think all but one of them had already outlawed slavery by the end of the war.
Okay.
However, in Delaware specifically, I believe it's Delaware, slavery remained legal at the end of the war. And it wasn't until the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, making slavery illegal.
And which was that year?
That was the end. See, the Emancipation Proclamation was, I believe, Congress passed it in January, and it took till the end of 1865 for enough states to ratify it so that it became part of the Constitution. By the way, 1 or 2 states did not ratify it till the second half of the 20th century. Pro forma, at least. One state did in 1978. But so the interesting thing is that even in that big a process, the Constitution was followed. And it is interesting to think of it at that level, that only the states to which his power as commander-in-chief applied had their slaves basically, what's the word I'm looking for, confiscated by the federal government and then set free. The other states which were not at war with the Union, their slaves remained slaves or were freed by laws that were passed in that state. And then at the end, when the the 13th Amendment became part of the U.S. Constitution, became fundamental law. At that point, the last 2 states, Delaware and I believe Kentucky, their slaves became free. So that's a very interesting thing. There's 1 or 2 other aspects I have always found interesting about how the Civil War affected constitutionality that we can talk about later if you want to go into that.
No, you go
okay,
ahead.
so let me go on to a couple of other things. One is this. So that was a very interesting thing that I think was positive. I think it's a testament to constitutional culture of this country. The second thing, again, a positive thing, was that Lincoln did not put off elections during the Civil War.
That's true.
Right? In a lot of countries today, as their constitutions and constitutional polities evolve, arguments are made, let's delay this election, that election, conditions are not good, emergency, and now we are talking about a national emergency again in this country. That discussion, Lincoln said, nothing doing. We're having our elections. It's a time of war. We're waging war. That has nothing to do with the operation of civil government. So that separation between military powers and activities and the civil running of the country stayed sacrosanct. However, there are a couple of things that I believe are problematic coming out of the Civil War, even from the constitutional point of view. One was that that tradition of referring to the president or looking at the president as commander-in-chief. Because to me, as a citizen of the United States, he's not my commander-in-chief. He's my chief executive, my president, whoever the president is, currently Donald Trump. But he's commander-in-chief of the military. Armed forces.
Yes.
All armed forces.
Yes, the military.
5 branches.
Yeah.
And therefore, his powers as commander-in-chief apply to functions of the office that are related to defense and waging war. And technically should not even come into effect until Congress declares war, which is what the Constitution says. But that has become part of the culture. Increasingly, especially after 9/11, there's this whole discussion, is the commander-in-chief, you can do this, you can do that. And without an actual real declaration of war, that's dicey anyway.
Yes.
So that has become a tradition, and because, and everyone invokes Lincoln in that discussion. The other thing that's a very subtle thing, an interesting thing, is the US became more of a centralized country and has become more of a unitary federation, or sort of a unitary country, since the Civil War. Up to the Civil War, it was a union, and which was very self-consciously, from the Declaration of Independence onwards, we say these United States, right? Even today, when you are writing legal documents, or you write, a prosecution is brought, for example, by a DA, a federal prosecutor, they say it's the United States versus, and the language is these United States. I had this argument once with a legal student who was writing the United States. And I'm like, you got to be careful. I'm not a lawyer. I've never formally studied the law. But as a writer, I know that this kind of document refers to them as these United States. So up to the Civil War, the federal government was actually relatively weak. And of course, there's another chapter in American history, which is the Articles of, what are they called? The first constitutional document we had, I always blank on the name. Let's forget that. The Articles of Confederation, or whatever they're called. But once the Constitution came into effect, if you read the Constitution, it's actually written as a way of defining these few powers are given to the federal government, everything else the states, because the states are ceding power. People are ceding power to the states are ceding power, some power to the federal government. But up to that point, it was still, the federal government was not as strong. It couldn't do stuff. It didn't have federal attacks. After the Civil War, firstly, because the federal government took such a strong action against certain states, it became a stronger power center within the country. And increasingly, even in the literature, you see a difference from saying these United States as a plural entity, so that even if a foreign country was referring to you, you'd say the United States are this and that.
That's true.
Nowadays, when we are talking of the United States, United States
because it's more of a federation style we look at it.
It's a unitary thing.
Yes.
So, and this might sound like a quibble linguistically, but effectively also, the federal government, since the Civil War, has taken more and more power. And there have been, of course, ways of justifying it constitutionally. A lot of it often, when it comes to interfering in commerce or controlling federal laws like tobacco and other things, they use what is known as the interstate commerce clause of the Constitution. Say, whatever affects because the Constitution gives the federal government power or legal authority over interstate commerce or interstate crime. So, for example, when the FBI was trying to find a way of taking down, the rash of armed robberies that were happening early in the 20th century, they would often be able to, because the moment someone committed a robbery and crossed the state line, it became a federal crime. And some of the armed robbers from, what's it called, Bonnie and Clyde era, would actually make it a point to make sure they didn't cross state lines so that the FBI could not come out. So these are all dynamics that, as I was saying to you before the show, these are very interesting to follow. And in the other countries we often pay attention to, like Pakistan, like Nigeria, major important countries in terms of their effect on global issues. These issues are playing out again, and it's instructive to look at U.S. history because people invoke U.S. history.
That's correct.
Just this week, the president of Nigeria dismissed the Chief Justice. And the reason given was that the Chief Justice had committed some malfeasance or some issue like that. And the argument being given is that he did that, and they're giving examples from the U.S. Hey, look, this justice was fired, that justice was
but
removed
in
from
U.S.
the bench.
things go according to law.
No, it does. The matter is not whether it goes into law. The matter is what does the law say and what is the procedure. So if a judge is removed in the U.S., and the example being given, there is a council or a committee that supervises judges, and they have the power. They have the power. It's not as if a governor from that state can go and say,
get out.
So that kind of lessons, and in the end it becomes about what is the weight of something? Is it worth firing one judge to set a precedent that then becomes problematic, which is the same kind of constitutional precedent we see in Pakistan's history, where the Supreme Court has often even justified military coups, and now that it's a precedent, the next military takeover just uses that. So these things are very important and instructive to look at.
Now let's talk about, I will tell you the way I see it, some kind of hypothesis, or you can say, and when I look at the war, my personal analysis, and my reason is not to be insensitive to any race or any religion or anything.
Or any issue.
Or I want to just, because see, I feel that the African American community suffered, there are a lot to do, they are suffering to this date, lot to do to the Civil War's consequence. That Civil War basically created all those kind of KKKs and all that. Now, if you look at the history of US, after its inception as the United States of America, this sectional debate was there, and you see it that...
you mean the race issue?
The race issue, about the slavery. I mean, the main was the slavery that time, of course. So this debate was there, and then what happens, as you remember, that North states slowly start abandoning it. Although in North, the agriculture was still there. I mean, it was a large part of their economy, but still they went into, start building railroads, steamers and all that, and industrialization. They started going to, and 84% of manufacturing coming from the North, while South was heavily relying on the agriculture, the plantation, okay? Now, if you go back a little bit, the Missouri Commission, Missouri Compromise, when Missouri wanted to be part of United States, then this question came in, and this is the time 1817 sometime. That time this question came that how to, that what we should do, because the House passed it, no slavery, but the Congress, but the overall, the Senate, it just stuck there. And then debate was keep going on. Then what happens, they came up with compromise that north of 36 degree and 30 latitude, 30-minute latitude, no states will be the slave state. That was agreed upon and everything done. Then what happens? So this is the one step forward in reducing this this tension between them. Then what happens? Then what happens that another act came, Kansas-Nebraska, when they wanted to be part of United States. Then this thing came again, and that time that act repealed Missouri Compromise.
The Missouri Compromise.
Although both Nebraska and Kansas were above 36 degree and
36 parallel,
parallel, basically 36 parallel, thanks. So, and then of course when Dred Scott decision came in this one, Supreme Court called Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional. Now when I see that, and let us be hypothetical here, that slavery was slowly going down, and in the north side it was very
globally,
strong.
There was a trend against.
That's correct. So sometime when I see the history, I see it that maybe if there will be no war, then another 50 years we have slavery would be abolished. Because see, the thing is that the main reason, as you mentioned before, that the states say that, well, this is the thing we have to do because we need to have a cotton business and we have to carry things. Assume cranes will start replacing the manpower. Railroads start replacing those carts which are pulled by the people. You know, slowly this will go away. And I feel that the African Americans would not suffer as much if there will be no civil war. There would be no KKK. There will be no hatred. How you see this? What do you call this utopia or whatever?
I have to take it at two different levels. First of all, if you look at the nature of slavery in the US or the New World, this specific example, and I know I get into a lot of trouble for this when I point this out, the way slavery was practiced in the New World was actually not the same way as, because slavery has been part of human history till that point. I think one of the last countries to abolish slavery was late in the 20th century, Saudi Arabia. Or
Saudi Arabia. Well, Saudi Arabia may still have it.
No, outlaw.
Yeah.
We're talking,
yes, that's correct.
Let's be clear about that. They outlawed it.
By law they don't. By law they don't,
Lots of stuff happens that is not legal. But the issue there is that slavery in the economy of the New World was justified using religion. And almost uniquely in history, slaves were considered subhuman. Now, here I want to be clear. I fully am cognizant of the fact that skin privilege exists. And for example, people are often point out that the word in colloquial Arabic for slave is the same as the word for black person.
Okay.
So therefore, people talk about, racism was also part of slavery.
What is the word?
I'm blanking on it. I mean, they sometimes use abd, right? Abd. And they might use abd. It goes the other way. Abd means slave, as we know from basic theology. But they also use the same word for black person.
I see.
Which is a really nasty thing to do. It is mean, it's evil, it's racist, and all of that. However, if you look at history, I mean, what we're looking at is now modern Arab attitudes. And not all Arabs, I'm quick to say, racist people exist in every community, in that community. If you look at history, Islamic history, people point out, oh, Islam has always worked in slavery. In Islamic history, we've had two very clear and large cases of slaves working their way up from slavery all the way to becoming kings.
In
right?
India
had the Mamluk dynasty, started by Qutb ibn Aybak and then Titmash and Razia. While Egypt had the Mamluk dynasty, which is a major part of world history, which was led by slaves. So slavery in that case, a slave was not considered literally subhuman. They were considered the lowest in society, and that has been coming, Rome had slaves, Europe had slaves, and in Europe, slavery was, in fact, before Europe got into the colonial business of building empires outside Europe, slaves were white.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. In fact, there is documentation that in the early days of the Americas, there were Irish people coming over. Some of them were freedmen, some of them were slaves, some of them were bonded labor.
Yeah.
And between slavery and bonded labor, there is a whole, there's a spectrum. And slavery as practiced here was bad. So we have to put that on the table. Beyond that, when you say the thing about theoreticals, when you bring up, let's look at it theoretically, I don't agree that if you delayed slavery and let it be abolished legally the way it was in the British Empire, earlier than the United States, then things would have gone better. What I would actually present you with a counter theory is that if you delayed slavery or the abolishing of slavery by 50 years, let us push everything else out by 50 years. Considering black folks, human beings, would be pushed out by 50 years. And at that point, it wasn't only black people that were considered not worthy of being full citizens.
Yeah, but
people like you and me, Asians, to use crude words, yellow and brown Asians, were also not, because the first immigration law in the US was passed against Chinese folks, right? The Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yeah.
So if you push everything out, I would posit that it took till 1948 to 52 for people like you and me to be able to get citizenship.
Yeah, but
so if you push that 50 years out, it wouldn't have been until after 2000 that you could become a citizen. And you and I have been citizens for longer than that.
But I have a counter argument here. See, the thing is that if I do that, I'm drawing a linear projection on that.
You and I are both engineers, sir. You cannot change one variable and not expect other variables to change.
No, I agree with you, and that's where I'm coming. So look at it. That when the war happened and society, the large part of society, Southern society, did not accept the defeat, so they resisted the change. Because see, when change comes by itself, when people agree to change, things go much faster than that. That's how I see it. Then it's not 50 years after that. Then it will integrate very fast because people will accept it.
See, my point is that slavery and that experience had ingrained racism so heavily in the system. I mean, Chinese folks were never slaves in this country. Your and my people, brown people, South Asians were never slaves.
The way they used to be.
Yeah. Yes. No. They were never slaves. They were bonded labor. They were doing other things. Yeah. In fact, I will posit that even today, people on an H-1 are bonded labor. Because it's not slavery. It's definitely not slavery. It's not as bad. They can buy BMWs and houses. But they cannot change employer. Look up legal, literal, or just sit down and think about the definition of if someone must work for one employer and before they change, their bond has to be moved to another employer. What is that? It is not slavery, but it's on that spectrum of servitude.
So, there's a sophisticated form.
So the point I'm raising is that just because folks were black, just like those folks were black, attitudes to them, attitudes to the Chinese folks, the laws that were passed against them were not because they were slaves, but there was racism. So my point is, we would only have delayed the beginning of the process of treating, because even after the Civil War, it took another 100 years, literally, for apartheid, and I will call it what it is, apartheid, segregation to end in this country. So if the abolishing of slavery had moved out, maybe it wouldn't have taken another 100 years, but it would still have taken some time for them to start to be treated as human beings. And I will posit that that would have a knock-on effect on the rights of other people as well. We're all in this together.
Yeah, but you know, you did not answer my main point. My main point is that since it was a war, the lost party, which was the dominant part in the country, huge part in the country, if not the dominant, they were resisting this change. If another 25, 30 years, because see, the way things were changing from the north side, that new states coming, they were not with slavery, and actually it was in the end they were not, they were taking as a free state. Maine was a free state. As a free state came, you know, they did not agree. US did not agree to induct them without. So slowly it is growing, that concept is growing, and once the technology would be there, don't you think?
Sir, my counter argument to technology will make things better is look around Silicon Valley. What has happened in the last 15 years, you would say technology will make things better. People working in Silicon Valley are worse off today. They are getting paid less. They are getting fewer benefits despite technology moving forward. And that has gone backwards in the last 15 years. So technology, I'm not a supporter of technological determinism. In fact, we now believe that today we have a worse income differential in the US than at the worst moment of the Gilded Age 100 years ago.
Yeah, no,
technology has not helped.
Yeah, see, the thing is that the main issue was to move the cartons, big, huge cartons. You know.
Basically, so they could not maintain and run, forget the cartons, the actual plantations could not be run
of course,
at that size without free labor, basically.
Yeah.
So tobacco would have been a more expensive product.
Yeah, but even in the north also, the agriculture was among the dominant part of, but they were not doing it.
So that makes your argument that slavery did not need to be done, but it was there. It was a choice. My point is to bring up Silicon Valley and other things is also to point out that they were choosing to run their economy that way. Of course, it was ingrained and they didn't know any better or any other way to do it, but they were choosing to do it that way, and it was. And people don't give up stuff easily.
Yeah. See, and that is the point, that people don't give up easily. But sometimes when there is a war creates wounds in the society, which doesn't go away for generations.
But if you try to end a certain attitude, I mean, the other examples of such fundamental change in this country are things like abortion, gay marriage. Gay marriage, in the end, got pushed forward by legal and by courts, but attitudes changed very rapidly. And within one generation, even Republicans, they say young Republicans are for gay marriage. So that makes your argument. But I don't think that the edges of society that are still racist or still homophobic or against gay marriage or anti-abortion, I don't think they would suddenly give up their attitudes.
Yeah, but the thing is that as long as they are in the minority, it would not have. Because see, I agree with you.
If you are saying people with those attitudes and minority, how do we have Donald Trump as president?
No, Donald Trump president is the, we can have that other argument because we're running out of time. But let's have that discussion. Why President Trump become in power? I mean, that would be...
We can have that discussion.
Next show, we will do that then. So I think that this is for today. So ladies and gentlemen, you saw us, me and my friend Sabahat, And we will be talking about these things in coming days, maybe me and Sabahat only. Sabahat is, he reads a lot, he has a very good knowledge, and I always like to listen to him. So this show is virtually my way of spending time with him and listening. So thank you, Sabahat, very much.
Well,
and we will be again together. Okay, so this is your host, Misbah Azam. Thank you and good day.